not related to the pandemic. It clearly was related to the pandemic. The pandemic hit us in the gut. It hit everybody throughout the world in the gut. We have recovered better than anybody else in the world. And that's because we invested, sometimes in a bipartisan way and sometimes in a partisan way. But we invested in our people, in our children, our families, our businesses, and in our health generally of our country, and indeed trying to help other parts of the world as well, because this is a global pandemic that affects us all. But I think the real difference is we perceive this as an investment. We think it will help grow America. You know, I have as I'm sure you've heard me talk about from time to time, Make It in America agenda. Our investment in both the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better will have a positive effect on making it in America. So we see it, Mr. Whip, as investment. We think it'll have a positive effect. We think it is having a positive effect. And as I say, unemployment's down below 4%, and jobs are up over 6 million over the last 11 months. So that's a good accomplishment. Is it enough? Do we still have people who aren't working for a varied number of reasons, and many of which are related to COVID-19? So we see it as an investment, and I'm hopeful the Build Back Better Act will pass, and I think that will have a positive effect, not only, as the President says, on the next 5 years, but on the next 5 generations. And so we're continuing to pursue that. But inflation, which is how we started this discussion, is a problem, and we need to deal with it. And I'd be glad to talk to the gentleman about what he thinks would be helpful to do that. And I know part of that is stop spending money. I think if we stop investing money, our country will not get to where it wants to be. And where it is now, with respect to the rest of the world, leading the rest of the world in terms of economic recovery from the pandemic. We're not there yet, but we're going to get there.
Thank the gentleman, and clearly we have a difference on what the effects of spending trillions of dollars would have, and Build Back Better, as the gentleman brought up, would be about $4.5 trillion of higher taxes, additional spending, things that by many accounts would increase inflation even higher. But we'll see where the Senate goes on that bill. I'm not sure if the gentleman's anticipating bringing other legislation, the bipartisan bills that we did to do things like create Operation Warp Speed, which was maybe one of the most successful things government did in reaction to a pandemic in the history of the world, to come up with not 1, not 2, but now 3 proven and effective vaccines in less than a year to a virus no one even knew about. Never happened in the history of the world, but something that we came together, Republicans and Democrats, with President Trump to achieve, a great achievement. Something we would sure urge President Biden to build on, because President Biden did run with a promise that he would, quote, shut down the virus. Clearly, he has failed at that. We've asked through a number of different means to have hearings on some of the things we've heard concerns about, and I would start with testing. There was an article recently that the president was presented with a plan in October to come up with about 750 million tests that people could have for COVID at home that would be readily available by Christmas, where they, in October, anticipated a resurgence of COVID by December. It's been reported that the president rejected that plan. We've asked for a hearing into that. For whatever reason, the majority has not agreed to that. Here was a letter I had sent to Mr. Clyburn and Ms. Maloney through the Select Subcommittee on Coronavirus, as well as through the Oversight Committee. Myself and Ranking Member Comer asked to have a hearing into some of these things. The testing failures that were reported, if they're true, we ought to hear about them. If they're false, the administration ought to be pointing that out. They have not, which tells me they must be true. But then why in October would the president have rejected a testing plan that could have prevented us from getting to the place we're at right now with this resurgence? What about some of the national plans that the president said he had as a candidate that then he later told governors recently he doesn't have a national plan on COVID. The mixed messaging coming from the administration is causing tremendous confusion across America, and we've asked that we have hearings to clarify, give the administration a chance to state their plan or the lack thereof, state whether or not they rejected a massive testing plan for the nation in October that would have prevented what happened in December. The lack of desire by the administration to be transparent about any of this is creating tremendous confusion across the country. This Congress could address that by holding hearings to get the facts out. I know we're going to continue to press for those kinds of hearings. I would hope we have them, but so far we have not gotten any response to the affirmative on that. And I don't know if the gentleman has anything to add. Maybe the gentleman would agree that we would have these kind of hearings to get some of these facts out or get some of these issues addressed, and I would yield.
Thank you, gentleman, for yielding, and I would say at the outset, I believe the committee on which he serves with Mr. Clyburn is one of the committees, among many, who ought to be looking at those facts. But let me say this, because in stating the facts as you just did, the appearance is that substantial progress has not been made. I don't think that premise is correct. Let me read you some statistics. Last year, the first year the president came into office, and testing in America was a molecular and at-home test per day. Last year, beginning of last year, 1.7 million per day. Today, 11.7 million tests per day are being conducted. So to imply that somehow there hasn't been substantial progress, that is a tenfold increase in the testing available to Americans every day. And when Biden took office, 0 at-home rapid tests were available to consumers, 0. Today, 300 million at-home rapid tests are on the market each month. Enough? No. Are more coming? Yes. Has the government used the Defense Production Act to accomplish greater production? They have. The administration started using, as I said, just the Defense Production Act. Biden administration is increasing places people can get free tests, for instance. You talk about a plan. When Biden took office, there were only 2,500 pharmacies offering free testing. Today, there are 20,000 sites, an 8-fold increase. The administration is purchasing 500 million at-home rapid tests to be distributed for free to Americans who want them, with initial deliveries starting this month. The administration is distributing up to 50 million free at-home self-tests to community health centers and rural health clinics. In addition, already covering PCR tests, the administration is requiring private insurance plans to cover at-home tests starting on January 15th, just a couple of days from today. So a lot is happening. Is enough happening? Enough's not happening until everybody has immediate availability. Immediate may overstate it, but easy access. The fact is that some people are having problems finding the at-home test now, and we need to work on that. But those statistics show you that extraordinary increases have occurred under the Biden administration, and that is their plan to make sure that these tests are available, because we know that testing will make a difference. So that if you find out if you're sick, you do quarantine. But I suggest to the gentleman that the Biden administration has made an extraordinary difference. Is the situation not where we want it to be? Absolutely it's not. Do we have a new variant that apparently came out of South Africa, or at least was first identified in South Africa, that spiked up? I talked to Dr. Monahan yesterday. Apparently, just in recent days, we've had a fall off in disease recognized. I hope that's the case. I hope it keeps going down because we are perhaps now using the KN95 or N95 mask and keeping our distance a little more conscientiously. Let's hope all of that works for the people, for the country, and for the globe. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The problem with President Biden's plan is that it's been reactionary, not visionary. When he was presented with a plan in October to make sure that every American that needed a test would have it in December, when they in October said there will probably be a real uptick in December, the president said no to that. So if today he says, let's go and order 500 million tests, that sounds fine and well, except that he said no to that in October when he could have staved off what we see, and that is hours-long lines of people to get tested. People shouldn't have to be waiting 5 hours in a line to get tested when the president in October was presented with a plan. And again, if he wasn't, as it's been reported, he should come out publicly and say that. The report's been out for weeks now, and he hasn't done that. We should be having hearings on this to find out what was the plan that was presented, who was involved, by the way, in rejecting that plan. Was the CDC involved? Was NIH involved? Was HHS involved in rejecting a forward-thinking plan in October that predicted what inevitably did happen this Christmas? Who was involved in the rejection of that plan, and why did they do it? Is it that the administration doesn't want accountability? I don't know, but we've asked those questions, and we've asked for a hearing on that, and we've been told it's not going to happen. I hope the gentleman would help push to get this to happen, to find this out, so that we don't play catch-up every time something happens. When there were people saying, hey, let's try to stop something before it becomes a problem, if there are people in the White House who said, no, we're not going to do it until it's a problem for families, those people ought to be removed from the White House. They shouldn't be involved in the decision-making chain, because their decisions caused maybe more deaths, surely caused a dramatic increase in the ills that people are facing right now, because it could have been staved off, and it wasn't. And we don't have that information from an administration who promised to be transparent. We did have a hearing a few days ago in the Select Subcommittee, and it was a private hearing. It wasn't open to the public. I didn't agree with that, but that was the decision made by the majority. We've got to start having transparency, as was promised to people. People deserve the transparency. They deserve to have these questions answered, and frankly, they deserve to have a more forward-thinking plan, not a reactionary plan when forward-thinking was presented and rejected. I would yield to the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. This has been a pretty calm discussion so far, but let me remind the gentleman that the previous president said in February or March of 2020, this is going to go away in about 30 days. Don't worry about it. It'll go away. And a lot of your members said, we don't need a mask. We don't need to keep distance. We don't need to wash our hands. This is just going to go away. It's here today and gone tomorrow. That was the previous administration's plan. Now, I agree with you. Both the science community, the private sector community, and the government on Warp Speed did a good job. Extraordinary work in the private sector. Extraordinary work around the world because of the computer age in which we live, able to share information instantaneously in real time and say this alternative doesn't work, which accelerated greatly the ability to get within a year an extraordinary accomplishment, largely from our scientific and medical community, but facilitated by Warp Speed. No doubt about that. Give credit where credit is due. But very frankly, the leader, unlike President Biden said, this is a problem, we have to be careful, we have to pursue it, we have to invest, said no problem. Now, the gentleman conveniently forgets that. He also ignores the statistics I just gave, where we've had a 10-fold, 8-fold increase in the availability of testing and pharmaceutical access for literally millions of people. I mean, this is per day we're talking about. 11.7 million people per day. You know, it doesn't take too long at that rate that the whole country, all 330 million people, in about a month and a few days, has been taken care of. So when you say we have to make progress, we have made extraordinary progress. And our view is, and I know we differ on this, we have made investments both in the American Recovery Act to deal with the pandemic crisis, with the infrastructure bill to create jobs and additional manufacturing capacity and training and apprenticeships for our people, and in Build Back Better to make sure that our families can keep their head above water and can, in fact, have child care on which they can rely and they feel their children are safe so they can take a job and be productive citizens and add to the growth of our economy. So we believe we're doing that. Are we doing it perfectly? None of us do it perfectly. Perhaps do we need to do more, as the gentleman implies, and have hearings? The gentleman says he was in a hearing, private or public. I presume the gentleman had an opportunity to ask questions of the witness. I don't know who the witnesses were, so I don't know what expertise they had. But I can't believe if you request of Mr. Clyburn that you have relevant witnesses to come by and you want to question about the progress that either has been made or you think ought to be made or further things that could be done. I can't believe that he wouldn't agree to do that. But in any event, great progress is being made. But the entire world, not the Biden world, not America, the entire world is confronting a crisis, and it's having a tough time getting a hold of it. We have done it better than anybody else in terms of growing our economy and keeping our people's head above water. That's to be applauded. Do we still have a challenge? We do. Are we still working out? We are. Do we need to continue? Yes. I yield.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. And under President Trump, when he created Operation Warp Speed, the one thing he did say is that we're going to move red tape so that we can focus the entire scientific community, both the federal agencies, but also the private sector, in working together in removing the red tape so that they can focus on getting a vaccine. He didn't say 3, but he said let's at least get them the ability to go. All of these great companies, many of that are American companies, to go put their innovation to work and get bureaucracy and red tape out of the way, follow science, but expedite so that we can get there quicker when many scientists, including some who still testify at committees today, said it was going to take years to get a vaccine. In less than a year, we had 3. And President Biden inherited that when he walked in the door. When he took the oath of office, he had 3 proven vaccines. And I know the gentleman talks about statistics. When you look at COVID deaths, because during the campaign, President Biden not only said he would crush the virus, but he said anybody who presided over that many deaths, and that was months before the election, doesn't deserve to be president of the United States. I thought that was an inappropriate statement. But more people have died under President Biden's watch from COVID than under President Trump's. It was an unfair standard that President Biden put in place when he was at one of the debates. But if he's going to say things like, I'm going to crush the virus and I'm going to have a plan, and then he comes out and obviously didn't crush the virus and then tells governors that there is no federal plan, I do think that's a mixed message at the least, that a dereliction in his promise at the worst that ought to be confronted. What is the plan? If there's a plan. If there's not a plan, admit there's not a plan. But you campaigned saying there was going to be a plan, and clearly there's not one. But those are other facts that we can put on the table. But clearly when you look at how President Trump pushed the federal government to work and partner with the private sector to move red tape so we can expedite the research and the trials, more tests than were ever done maybe on any other attempt for a vaccine, and come up in less than a year with vaccines when many said it would take years. Clearly a remarkable achievement that we all worked on. Mm-hmm. President Trump led the effort. We funded it in a very bipartisan way, and it was very effective. Obviously, this is a challenge for every country, but there were other things said that ought to be put out there, and let's at least try to all be saying the same thing and focusing on the same thing. And when scientific experts say this is what we anticipate happening, if you're going to reject that science, at least hold people accountable who were part of the discussions to reject that science, as I refer to the October rejection of a testing plan that would have been in effect for December. That was rejected. And
look, for a long time, the President of the United States, he's changed the former President of the United States apparently changed his view now and criticized DeSantis for not pursuing mask wearing, et cetera, et cetera. And the fact of the matter is, of course, the former president discouraged wearing masks early on. Discouraged it. Oh, no, they don't need to wear a mask. He had events that were spreader events, as we call it. But the gentleman heard me say, I think the president followed good advice and made a decision on warp speed that was helpful. Now, as the gentleman noticed, it was noted, it was the scientists at NIH and the scientists in the private sector and scientists throughout the world, but mainly our people, who did an extraordinary thing in an extraordinary short time frame. Never been done before to develop this kind of a vaccine. You talk about the 3 vaccines, the 3 manufacturers. Never been done before. So it was a wonderful event. Unfortunately, too many people are advising, don't take the vaccine. You don't have to take the vaccine. Don't sweat it. Now, very frankly, government tells people they've got to vaccinate their children to send them to school. Why? So other children don't get sick. I told you I had those great-grandchildren in school, 3 of whom are in school. And, you know, they have a child sits in front of them, a child sits to their right, a child sits to their left, and a child sits behind them. I want all of them well, because I don't want my grandchild, my great-grandchild, getting sick. Very frankly, I don't think there was a very successful effort either by the former president or by many on your side of the aisle to say, do what the scientists, you talk about science, do what the scientists tell you to do. Now, I notice most of your members are doing so now, but still some wear it as a badge of courage that they don't, and they raise money off it. I think that is harmful to our communities. And I think you sort of just set aside no plan. Well, no plan has resulted going from 1.7 million to 11.7 million tests per day. That's the plan. And we invested in March in the Recovery Act in making sure that health services could respond properly. A lot of money went into health, as you know, and testing in that rescue plan, the American Rescue Plan. So you keep saying there's no plan. We've adopted plans. We think they are positive plans. And we think, hopefully, that we're going to get better soon. But neither President Trump nor President Biden were responsible for this extraordinary virus. Our view is President Trump laid back for a long, long time before he really engaged heavily in this. And now he's changed his tune to a much more positive, listen to the scientists kind of attitude, which we welcome. But I disagree with the gentleman that there's not a plan. We adopted together in 2020 5 major pieces of legislation to address this challenge. And we have adopted in a partisan way, unfortunately, bills that continue to fight that fight, and I think is fighting it not as successfully because we have a new variant, much more transmissible, a different type. It is metastasized into a more communicable disease, and that's caused us a challenge. And we're addressing that, and we're accelerating the availability of resources to do so. I yield.
And thank the gentleman for yielding. And clearly we have some disagreements, but right. You know, as we both have advocated for the vaccine, I do think one of the differences that we may have is that I strongly feel that it's a personal decision. It's a medical decision. And if government thinks that shaming people and threatening people and firing people is going to address that challenge, they've missed the mark. And I just wish they would instead move away from the shaming and the firing, and hopefully the court, that the U.S. Supreme Court agrees with us and stops at least the firings of people by mandates from the government, and just encourage people to have that conversation with their doctor if they have hesitation. But ultimately, it's a decision that each individual would have to make. And we will continue this conversation, I'm sure. And I would yield.
I just want to say, in terms of where we are today, the overwhelming percentage, I'm talking about 90%, of people who are getting really sick are people who are not vaccinated. And for the government to say, you need to be vaccinated, because we don't want you coming to the office, we don't want you coming with other people who are being careful, who have been vaccinated, who have done the responsible thing, and getting them sick. Because what we've seen, unfortunately, even with vaccination, people who are vaccinated, of our own members, on both sides of the aisle who have been vaccinated have gotten, thankfully, mild cases of COVID. But you know, when we talk about the president wanting people to get vaccinated, and you indicate that you and I are both advocates of that, or requiring them to get vaccinated. The reason you require people to get vaccinated, the more people you have unvaccinated, the more hosts this virus has to metastasize, to grow into different type of virus that can attack in different ways. That's why you do that. That's why they talk 70%. Now, we just have about 70% in America now. Very frankly, if we had a higher percentage, we'd be better off. So let's hope that we can work together to make sure that we give encouragement to people to do what the scientists, you talk about, the reason we were so successful in that year under warp speed of getting those 3 vaccines is because the scientists knew what had to be done. And they found out, and they had quick discoveries and eliminated a lot of dead ends relatively quickly because of our computer capability and transformation of information around the world and dead ends. If we listen to them, we'd be better off. But there are an awful lot of people who are saying, don't listen to them, don't do it. And when the gentleman says for health reasons, there are hundreds, probably billions, I don't know what the billions are, people have been vaccinated with a minuscule, almost undetectable adverse reaction. So I don't know what the gentleman talks about for health reasons. I know Djokovic says he's doing it for health reasons. I don't know what those are. Maybe you do. I'm not an expert enough to know what that is. But all the doctors I talk to, and certainly our own doctor here, who we consult with on a regular basis, I know both of us have done that, say, get the vaccine. So I would hope that all of us would ask our constituents, get the vaccine. It is good for you. It saves your lives. It saves your families. It saves others. Get it. I yield back.
And thanks. And to be clear, I never said it was for health reasons. I said it was a health decision. So this is a medical decision that people are making. And again, in the past, we've seen this suggested by some in the medical community inaccurately that if you get vaccinated, you can't get the virus. A Supreme Court justice said, if you get vaccinated, you can't spread the virus. That turned out to be false. We know whether vaccinated or not, you can get the virus. You can receive the virus. You can give it to other people. You can die. We know in the hospitals, the higher propensity of people in the hospitals are unvaccinated. Those are the kind of things that we should be encouraging to get the facts out, and then encouraging people to go make their decision with their doctor if they have concerns and questions. And there's valid questions. There's people in the past who have raised religious exemptions to other vaccines, and by the way, given approval for those religious exemptions that today are not getting similar religious exemptions for this. And so let's just treat it equally. Let's treat it fairly. Let's just focus on the facts. This idea that if you mandate something and threaten somebody, it's going to change behavior, it's just not proving itself to be correct, and it's causing more division and forcing people into corners that they shouldn't be on. And so hopefully, again, we can continue this conversation and get back to a place where we're in agreement, which we have been on things like Operation Warp Speed. But with that, I would be happy to yield back. Thank you to the Majority Leader. Madam Speaker, yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. Okay, for what purpose does the gentlewoman from Ohio seek recognition?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to commemorate 109 years of sisterhood, scholarship, and service in Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Founders Day embodies the living legacy of our predecessors. And today, 6 members of the Congressional Black Caucus, Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence, Congresswoman Val Demings, Congresswoman Lucy McBath, Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett, and I stand proudly in our founders' footsteps. Happy Founders Day to the Columbus Alumni Chapter, Delta Kappa Chapter, and to all my sisters in Delta Sigma Theta Sorority. And I yield back.
The chair will receive a message.
Madam Speaker, messages from the Senate.
Madam Speaker,
Madam Secretary.
I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has passed S-2201, an act to manage supply chain risk through counterintelligence training and for other purposes, in which concurrence of the House is requested.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today to address President Biden's COVID crisis. Sadly, COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations in the United States have reached record highs in the past week. Many Americans are having trouble finding COVID at-home tests and difficulties in scheduling a time to be tested with their health care provider. What is President Biden's response? In a recent COVID Zoom meeting with the governors, President Biden said, quote, "There is no federal solution," end quotes. Now, this mishandling of the pandemic is disappointing. Operation Warp Speed, developed under the previous administration, provided significant vaccines in record time. This initiative also established a robust distribution plan, innovative treatments, medical equipment, and ever-growing testing capacity. Madam Speaker, in addition to this, our families are struggling to pay for everyday goods as inflation reaches a 40-year high. We are facing a self-inflicted economic crisis as this administration encourages our workforce to stay at home. Our students continue to face uncertainty in their learning with last-minute school closures despite schools receiving ample COVID relief funding. To distract from these failures, President Biden and congressional Democrats are trying to change the rules in the Senate to pass the socialist agenda.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, on January 6th, we witnessed a violent coup attempt in our capital fueled by the big lie. Our country continues to face a slow-moving coup in the form of voter suppression. I've seen firsthand in my home state of Arizona voter suppression laws targeting people of color and a state Senate that would rather waste taxpayer money on a sham audit instead of upholding our most sacred democratic right, the right to vote. The Freedom to Vote, John Lewis Voting Rights Act, is critical to protecting the vote in my state and states across the country where restrictive laws are being put into place to strip people of the right to vote. Arizona will stand strong together this weekend. Thousands will gather this Saturday in Phoenix for democracy and voting rights. Passing this bill today answers their call by guaranteeing access to democracy for every Arizonan. Today, the House showed where it stands. We won't shrink from protecting our democracy and the voting rights of all Americans. It's past time for the U.S. Senate and Senator Sinema to do the same. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Mississippi seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to honor the memory of the late Granville Crane, surviving crew member of the USS Indianapolis and recipient of the Congressional Gold Medal. Mr. Crane was born in 1925 and turned 95 years old this year. He joined the ship's crew at the age of 16, one of the youngest crew members to join at the height of World War II. In 1945, he participated in a top-secret trip to deliver parts for the first nuclear weapon ever used in combat, and was aboard the same ship when it was torpedoed and sunk that year. Hundreds of men went down with their ship, and many more faced dehydration, shark attacks, and exposure before there was any hope of rescue. Of 1,195 men aboard, Mr. Crane was one of only 316 who survived. As Mr. Crane waited to be rescued, he clung to his faith. Mr. Crane will be remembered as a family man, a hero, a survivor, a patriot, and a great man of God. On behalf of the 4th District and our great nation, we are forever in your debt. My prayers are with Mr. Crane's family at this time, and may he rest in peace. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise or extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
20 states, including Louisiana, still have the same hourly floor as a federal minimum wage, $7.25. Louisiana also has the second highest poverty rate of any state. That's because the minimum wage is a poverty wage. A full-time salary is less than $16,000 a year. No one can survive, much less raise a family, on that wage. While the federal minimum wage has not increased since 2009, the cost of housing, medicine, food, childcare has all exponentially increased. We cannot simply subject millions of our constituents to endure the trials of poverty. It's not a mystery. We can, we must, we know how to help. It's time to finally increase the federal minimum wage and lower the costs with a better Build Back Better Act. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the Speaker. I rise today to bring attention to the latest Consumer Price Index data released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics just yesterday. This new data shows a 7% annual increase in inflation, the largest 12-month increase since 1982. The last time inflation was this out of control, Michael Jackson had just released Thriller. So from moonwalking to now sleepwalking with President Biden, we've continuously seen negative real wages, meaning our pay is actually decreasing when you account for inflation. And the president's only idea is to print and spend more money. Gasoline up 50%, propane, kerosene, firewood up 34%, and beef, veal, and bacon up 18%. Higher inflation is eroding the true purchasing power for all American families, and these record-breaking CPI numbers underestimate the real cost of inflation. Americans need leadership that will prioritize getting our economy and our nation back on its pre-pandemic performance. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
I seek permission to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. January 14th marks the first time in 6 months that families will not receive an expanded child tax credit payment, a program to support children and families that Congress passed last spring with the American Rescue Plan. For the last 6 months, working and low-income families have had the relief of knowing that every month they would receive $250 per child and $300 for kids under 6. These payments have been a lifeline for families, helping them put food on the table and provide for children as the pandemic rages. As a result, child poverty and hunger have been dropped in this country by almost half. More than 7,600 families 76,000 families in my district receive these monthly payments, and they're worried about what will happen now that the payments have ended. Just last weekend, 2 constituents, a dad and a grandmother, approached me to say how important the CTC program had been. We cannot go backwards. The Senate must move quickly to pass the Build Back Better Act and extend the child tax credit. America's children are counting on us. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I'm honored to recognize an outstanding constituent of Texas 6, Battalion Chief David Maker, who has dutifully served the people of Waxahachie for the past 26 years. David was named Battalion Chief in 2018, but was leading in and out of the fire station well before that. Throughout his career, he has set the tone for what it means to be a good leader. I'm incredibly proud to announce that Chief Maker was named Firefighter of the Year for Waxahachie in 2021, an outstanding honor for which he deserves to be recognized. David also helps his community. He's done so by starting a nonprofit called Compassion for the Fatherless, which works with an orphanage overseas in fulfilling the needs of children by providing them with a strong foundation to be successful in life. David, you truly lead by example. I and the citizens of Waxahachie thank you for your incredible service and leadership in our community and to those who need it most. Congratulations on the well-deserved honor. I yield back my time. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Georgia seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise to announce that it's finally infrastructure year.
The gentlewoman will suspend. For what purpose does the gentlewoman seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask for consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I rise to announce that it's finally infrastructure year for Georgia's 5th Congressional District. I've seen firsthand how the infrastructure bill will transform the entire 5th Congressional District in Georgia. To share just a few projects, we're going to repair crumbling bridges in the city of South Fulton, extend the Peachtree Creek Greenway in Brookhaven, make Forest Park a more pedestrian-friendly city, and maintain Hartsville-Jackson's title as the world's busiest airport. We are delivering for the people. I'm especially proud that the infrastructure bill includes the Reconnecting Neighborhoods program based on legislation that I wrote. This program will reconnect neighborhoods like the Sweet Auburn district that was intentionally divided by the construction of federal interstates. This is a matter of racial justice because for far too often it was Black neighborhoods that were divided. I've met with community leaders to hear what they need from the program, and I'll continue to be their voice in Washington as they build back better. And I almost forgot. While we're making these decades overdue investments in infrastructure, we're going to also create millions of good-paying union jobs. Democrats have delivered for the 5th District and our country, and we're not done yet.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
I'd like to speak for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
It was a very disappointing recess. I knew at least 3 more people who passed away because of the COVID. For that reason, I was very disappointed in President Biden's comments earlier today on television, in that I think he could have brought up things that would have prevented some of these unnecessary deaths. First of all, President Trump's COVID was cured by monoclonal antibodies 16 months ago. Nevertheless, in my district, we have a shortage of monoclonal antibodies. I have doctors or clinics calling me wondering where they are. It's a good question. They were available for the President of the United States 16 months ago, but for some reason, President Biden and his team has shortages of monoclonal antibodies in my district that I'm convinced would have saved some of these lives. The next thing I'll point out is that my doctors tell me that people are better off if they're taking vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc, quercetin. All these things would save people's lives if they were taking them up front before they got the virus. But again, President Biden gives a big speech, no comments on this.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise for 1 minute and I ask unanimous consent to speak to the House.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Sometimes it's extremely difficult, Madam Speaker, to really convey in this form both the pain and the emotion of one's journey in life. I worked for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the conference that Dr. Martin Luther King and Ralph David Abernathy organized and gathered foot soldiers from around America. They were, in fact, the beloved community and included the likes of John Robert Lewis and many others that sit in this House today. I walked on plantations and tried to register sharecroppers. And so I come today to recount for us the words of Dr. King, "We shall overcome," because the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. We need to enact democracy reform now more than ever, because state lawmakers introduced over 440 suppression bills in 49 states. We cannot allow the other body to stand on some sort of pro forma dignity that they cannot overturn the filibuster. When people died for the vote, we honor Dr. King on Monday. I want that vote to be his honor that we have voting rights. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Unanimous consent, address House for a minute and rise to the remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, we have a lot of lofty goals in this country about green energy, renewable energy and such, but we're not providing the ways in order to get there. One of the important components is the mined products that we need to go into the various equipment and into vehicles, etc. You know, we're not able to mine the critical minerals, the rare earths in this country. For example, to get a permit to open a type of a mine or expand a mine, it could be 15, 16, 18 years in this country, while our neighbors just north of the border, 2-3-year process to secure the permits to mine products that are desperately needed in this country if we're ever going to talk about meeting the goals you would have for renewable energy, electric cars, and all that, in order to lower the carbon footprint. So what is the hypocrisy here? In my home state of California, you can hardly get mining done. You can hardly even keep electricity flowing because of taking away power plants due to, and these are power plants that would be zero CO2. I don't understand the hypocrisy. So we have to get smart about this. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and advise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to honor the life of a champion for democracy, David Sassoli, President of the European Parliament, who passed away earlier this week. President Sassoli was a respected leader of conviction and principle, a distinguished Italian journalist turned public servant dedicated to his service to helping vulnerable women, homelessness, individuals, and the rights of refugees. Sassoli was a symbol of balance and generosity to Europe. His leadership and commitment to social justice will not be forgotten. He will be remembered as a stalwart defender of shared European and American values of human rights, rule of law, and equality. I send my deepest condolences, as I do know members of the House do, to the people of the European Union, and my thoughts and prayers are with his family and loved ones. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, our constituents sent us here to deliver for them, and the bipartisan infrastructure law is delivering for San Diego. Recently, the Department of Transportation announced that $24 million has been allocated to the San Diego International Airport, supporting tourism for our international city and helping our economy recover. But it's not just the airport. $4.8 billion in highway funding has been allocated to California already, the first of more than $29 billion in road and bridge funding coming to our state. Last week, I visited sites in my district in El Cerrito, Kensington, and Talmadge, where neighborhood roads were cracked, crumbling, and in need of repair. I've spoken with constituents, local officials, and small business owners in La Mesa and El Cajon about the importance of transit, walkability, and broadband. Because this may be the largest infrastructure bill since Eisenhower, but it's also one that's focused on the needs of the 21st century. Connecting people by roads, transit, and high-speed internet can help us cross divides and expand opportunity, and it makes our society fairer, more sustainable, and more equitable. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Ohio seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to join President Biden and my colleagues in Congress in calling for action, long overdue action, to protect the right to vote. President Biden delivered a powerful speech this week in Georgia, and I am hopeful that this stiffened the spines of some of those here in the Capitol. I know that I want to live in the America of John Lewis, not Bull Connor, and the America of Dr. King, not George Wallace. Today, I was proud to vote for the vital legislation to protect the essential right to vote. Now the Senate must act using all available means. The filibuster is not a law, and it is not in the Constitution. It is a tradition that has been misused throughout history to deny civil and voting rights, and it is being used again today. What is in the Constitution? The right to vote. Ahead of Dr. Martin Luther King Day, it is time to honor those who came before us to secure the America that we live in today. The eyes of history are upon us. We cannot let this moment pass us by. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Every American deserves the opportunities that a good-paying job makes possible. Working with the Biden-Harris administration, Democrats in Congress have expanded those opportunities. Thanks to investments like the American Rescue Plan and the bipartisan infrastructure law, job creation is at record levels. The bipartisan infrastructure law will create millions more good-paying union jobs. Not only will it rebuild our roads and bridges, it invests in infrastructure that will spur economic development in our communities. Removing lead pipes and guaranteeing clean drinking water for 10 million more Americans will improve community health and help attract new companies that will bring jobs and investments. So will expanding reliable broadband and modernizing regional airports like the DeKalb-Taylor Municipal Airport in my district. Finally, expanding our electric vehicle charging network will give Americans more options when choosing a new car while accelerating climate action. I am so proud to work with the Biden-Harris administration to rebuild infrastructure for Illinois families, and we're just getting started.
Expired.
I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to honor the extraordinary life of Dr. Margaret Hill, who passed away peacefully last month at the age of 81. She was, for many who knew her, the heartbeat of San Bernardino. For 50 years, she devoted herself to ensuring all children have access to high-quality education. In 1971, she began as a high school teacher and would go on to serve as principal, assistant superintendent for San Bernardino County, an adjunct professor, and finally, the last decade, when I've known her more, as a school board member for San Bernardino City Unified. Through all her roles, Dr. Hill never wavered in her devotion to the children of our community. Her warmth, her wisdom, and her kind spirit will be missed, but her legacy lives on in the countless lives that she touched in the classroom and in the community. It was a privilege to know her, Madam Speaker. May she rest in peace. Yield back.
The chair lays before the House sundry communications.
The Honorable the Speaker. Madam, on November 4th, 2021, the Committee on Ethics received notices of 2 fines imposed upon Representative Andrew Clyde by the Sergeant at Arms pursuant to House Resolution 38 and House Rule 2, Clause 3G. On November 8th, 2021, the committee received notice of a fine imposed upon Representative Clyde by the Sergeant at Arms pursuant to House Resolution 38 and House Rule 2, Clause 3G. On November 9th, 2021, the committee received notice of a fine imposed upon Representative Clyde by the Sergeant at Arms pursuant to House Resolution 38 and House Rule 2, Clause 3G. On November 18th, 2021, the committee received notice of 2 fines imposed upon Representative Clyde by the Sergeant at Arms pursuant to House Resolution 38 and House Rule 2, Clause 3G. On November 30th, 2021, the committee received notice of a fine imposed upon Representative Clyde by the Sergeant at Arms pursuant to House Resolution 38 and House Rule 2, Clause 3G. On November 30th, 2021, the committee received an appeal from Representative Clyde of the above fines pursuant to House Resolution 38 and House Rule 2, Clause 3G. The appeal was received after the committee adopted its written rules. A majority of the committee did not agree to the appeal. On December 3rd, 2021, the committee received notices of 3 fines imposed upon Representative Clyde by the Sergeant at Arms pursuant to House Resolution 38 and House Rule 2, Clause 3G. Representative Clyde did not appeal with the committee prior to the expiration of the time period specified in Clause 3G 3B of House Rule 2. Signed, sincerely, Theodore E. Deutsch, Chairman, and Jackie Walorski, Ranking Member. The Honorable, the Speaker. Madam, on November 30th, 2021, the Committee on Ethics received notice of a fine imposed upon Representative Marionette Miller Meeks by the Sergeant at Arms pursuant to House Rule Resolution 38 and House Rule 2, Clause 3G. Representative Miller Meeks did not file an appeal with the committee prior to the expiration of the time period specified in Clause 3G 3B of House Rule 2. Signed, sincerely, Theodore E. Deutsch, Chairman, and Jackie Walorski, Ranking Member. The Honorable, the Speaker. Madam, on November 30th, 2021, the Committee on Ethics received notice of a fine imposed upon Representative Lauren Boebert by the Sergeant at Arms pursuant to House Resolution 38 and House Rule 2, Clause 3G. Representative Boebert did not file an appeal with the committee prior to the expiration of the time period specified in Clause 3G 3B of House Rule 2. Signed, sincerely, Theodore E. Deutsch, Chairman, and Jackie Walorski, Ranking Member. The Honorable, the Speaker. Madam, on November 30th, 2021, the Committee on Ethics received notice of a fine imposed upon Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene by the Sergeant at Arms pursuant to House Resolution 38 and House Rule 2, Clause 3G. Representative Greene did not file an appeal with the committee prior to the expiration of the time period specified in Clause 3G 3B of House Rule 2. On December 3rd, 2021, the committee received notice of a fine imposed upon Representative Greene by the Sergeant at Arms pursuant to House Resolution 38 and House Rule 2, Clause 3G. Representative Greene did not file an appeal with the committee prior to the expiration of the time period specified in Clause 3G 3B of House Rule 2. Signed, sincerely, Theodore E. Deutsch, Chairman, and Jackie Walorski, Ranking Member.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 4th, 2021, the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Clyburn, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the subject of my special order.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I first got interested in and started studying history as an 8-year-old. I grew up in a parsonage where my brothers and I were required every morning before breakfast to recite a Bible verse. And every evening before retiring to bed, we had to share with our parents a current event. We didn't have television, and therefore, in order to carry out that rule, we had to read the newspapers. It was delivered to our home every afternoon. Today, those who are living down in my hometown of Sumter, you get the Sumter Daily Item in the morning. But back then, it was an afternoon paper. And it was when my interest in the presidential campaign of Harry Truman that attracted me to politics. Harry Truman ascended to the presidency from the vice presidency, and of course, no one gave him a chance to get elected on his own. He did not have, according to conventional wisdom, what it took. And he was going to be up against this scion, this big-time prosecutor from New York, Thomas Dewey. In fact, one Chicago newspaper was so assured of the outcome, they didn't bother to wait on the results to write the headlines for their newspapers the day after the election. And all of us remember that headline, Dewey wins. But when the votes were counted, all the votes counted, Truman had been elected president. That always intrigued me. This man with a limited educational background, a disability, without any of all the trappings of what would make one a big-time leader. And of course, when Truman left office, he was not very popular with a lot of people. In fact, his popularity was pretty low. But as we look back on history, and people continue to write about history, they keep upgrading Truman. Most places I see now, he's in the top 10. In my opinion, he's in the top 5. I consider myself to this day a Truman Democrat. Now, after studying history, I went on to teach it. And I became a firm believer in George Santayana's admonition that those who cannot remember history, of course he said the past, are condemned to repeat it. And that's what brings me to this floor today. It's been a long, long time since I have stayed here on what we call Getaway Day to address this body doing what we call special orders. I listened intently today as we debated the legislation that was the vehicle by which we would send 2 pieces of legislation, the Freedom to Vote Act, an act that came into being a bill that was proposed by Senator Joe Manchin. And the second bill was the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, a bill that this body approved and sent over to the Senate as H.R. 4. And upon John Lewis's death, I came to this floor and asked and received unanimous consent to change the name of H.R. 4 to rename it in honor of John Lewis. And this body granted unanimous consent for that to happen. Now, John Lewis and I first met as 19-year-old college students. I was in Orangeburg. He was down in Orangeburg, South Carolina. He was down in Nashville, Tennessee. And we met on the campus of Morehouse College, where the vice president was on the day before yesterday, I think it was. It was also the weekend that I first met Martin Luther King, Jr. Now, as is often the case, and we see quite a bit of it today, a disagreement cropped up between us so-called young Turks, those of us who were in SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. In fact, this was the second organizational meeting of SNCC. And SCLC, that was being run by Martin Luther King Jr., Ralph Abernathy, and others. And we asked Dr. King to come and meet with us so we could try to reconcile our differences. Dr. King came and agreed to a 1-hour meeting. That meeting convened at 10 p.m. in the evening. It was not over until 4 a.m. the next morning. I always refer to that evening and that meeting as my Saul to Paul transformation. I came out of that meeting a changed man. Well, I guess, boy. I have never been the same. I started reading everything I could about Dr. King. I went back to my campus. I got his book, his first book, Stride Toward Freedom. And, of course, all the way down through his last book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. I interacted with him several times over the years. And after the 1965 Voting Rights Act, one of Dr. King's first trips was to the little town of Kingstree, South Carolina, a rural town in Williamsburg County that is currently in my district. And when he came that day, he came to talk to us about all the marches we were having. I was living in Charleston at the time. My late wife and I got in our little Falcon and drove to Kingstree to be a part of that meeting. And Dr. King talked that day about marching. We had marched to integrate lunch counters. We had marched to get off the back of the bus. We had marched for a lot of social things. But he said to us on that day, it is time to march to the ballot boxes. March to the ballot boxes. He put a new definition on what marching was all about. I remember that day as if it were yesterday. In fact, not long ago, the local community decided to have a 50th anniversary celebration of that event and called me and asked would I attend. I told them I would be glad to attend. And of course, as I later got a phone call from a reporter who asked me what was I going to say at this 50th anniversary. And I told the reporter, I said, well, I think I'll reminisce a little bit about that day and the speech he gave. And he says, well, did you see it on television? How do you know about the speech? I said, I was there. The reporter didn't quite believe that I was there. And of course, he questioned me, wanting to know what I remembered most about that day. And I said to him, the thing I remember most about that day was that it was a very big storm. In fact, the storm was so bad until on our way there we had to stop and wait it out. And when I got there, I was sure that we were not going to have a celebration. But the sun came out. Dr. King came. But there was so much rain until that cow pasture, I told him, that we were in, it was not very conducive for the convention. The reporter was kind of quiet, hung up. A few days later, the reporter called me back. The reporter had gone to the Weather Bureau to check out my story about that day, and sheepishly reported to me that I've checked it out and your description of that day is pretty accurate. I said, well, I lived through it. The things you live through are the kind of things that you remember most, and you remember them best. I've lived through a lot growing up in South Carolina. I remember the conversations I had with my parents. My mother was a beautician. And as you can remember, imagine, a lot of conversations going in the beauty shop. So when my mother would sit down with me, we would often have discussions about information that flowed throughout the beauty shop. In fact, I wrote about one day coming home from school, one of the rules we had that we had to stop by the beauty shop to report in after school every day to make sure that things had gone okay. On this particular day when I went in to the beauty shop to make my report, there was a lady there that had grown up with my mother in the cotton field adjacent to the one that she grew up in over in Lee County, South Carolina. And when I walked in, I spoke. And this lady turned to me and says, my, how much you've grown since I last saw you. And my goodness, she said, your voice is beginning to change. And then she asked me a question. What it is that you want to be when you grow up? That question was asked of us very often back then. And I began to tell her how proud I was of that background that I had developed since 1948, studying Harry Truman, and how I had developed this interest in politics and government. And I told her I wanted to grow up and I wanted to be a member of the United States Congress. And that lady looked at me and very sternly said, son, don't you let anybody else hear you say that again. Now, that lady was not throwing cold water on my dreams. She just felt that a little black boy in Sumter, South Carolina should not have those kinds of dreams and aspirations. It was not safe for a little black boy to have those kinds of dreams. My mother never said anything that day. But that night when she closed the beauty shop, she came into the house and she called me to the kitchen table. And she sat me down and said, now, James, don't you let what that lady said to you today ruin your dreams. You stay in school. You study hard. You stay out of trouble. You can be able to live out your dreams and your aspirations. My mom did not live to see me get elected to Congress. She died in 1971. I didn't get here until 92. But I think about her almost every time I come into this chamber, how right she was. And so today, looking back on that history, I recall from my studies that the first civil rights bill passed by this Congress was passed in 1866, giving the former slaves the right of citizenship. And of course, following that 1866 law, South Carolina held a constitutional convention in 1868. And that's a very interesting constitutional convention. I would like to share with you some of what took place in that convention. There are two things kind of interesting about the convention to me. Number one is the majority of the attendees at that convention were black.
They won't let us stand there because that's where the White House comes in. And that pen is packed. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll try and stay away. But there's that's yeah, it's not for us. It's for the print people here, and it's for the White House press corps coming. So we can't stand there. So I'm going to go back to my. Hey, can I talk to you in a second? I want to say something. No, it's for the record. Go ahead. Yeah, stand up for Slack. Yeah, I don't even know what you're saying. Yeah, I didn't know there was anything about it.
Mr. President, how do you get this done?
You got that, right? I mean, I got most of their some. What did you ask?
you get this done. Question about how he gets this done. Someone else shouted something too. What's your message? Something about from your. Julie, did you shout something? You shouted something, right? I said, "What's your message?" What's your Senator? Hi. Good to see you.
No shot. No shot.
That's what I need to hear. That's what I need to hear now. Right. Like, that's what I want to understand.
I hope you like the spot we took. They said, where do you want to put the pool? We said, right here. Yeah, we can do it. It's going to be great. Take care of us. Allie, there's this is, we can leave. This is space. Don't know. There's all social distance. Yeah.
Touchscreen's off. That means you can't use the touchscreen. If you want it on, you just go in there and hit touchscreen on and the menu.
I have to grab my backpack. Oh, sorry.
You can have that display off.
I suggested 3 other things.